We're getting now into, on chapter 8, starting the discussion of Hashem's absolute oneness, the absolute unity of Hashem, which means, till now we discussed how the world was not a conflict to the oneness of God. The world existed, was not outside of God, is not outside of God. Now we're talking about the next thing. God himself is not a composite. While we all know there's something called God's chesed and God's gevura and God's chachma and God's bina and all the different aspects. Good morning. Good morning. We are dull. Good morning. We are just starting. Good timing. Your timing is impeccable. So basically, we're discussing how the incredible unity of Hashem is something that our minds can't grasp. The Rambam quoted, we asked the question, how could it be that Hashem is absolutely one? Hashem is made up of, he's one, but why isn't he a composite? Everything in the world is a composite. God is not a composite of Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gevur, Teferes, aspects, Hashem, Havaya, Elikim. All that makes up the perfect one God. We said, no. My God, there is no parts making him up. He is one essence. And that's what we started last week. So the Rambam explained, don't try and understand this. It's not in the human ability to understand this concept. So I want to go back now and start from the point of understanding how the human mind works, so to speak, how we think, how we assess, how we analyze, how we see the world. And it's all based on ourselves. What does that mean? We project, we interpret everything based on ourselves. That's the key of today's discussion. In other words, we don't have the ability to see outside our box. Just like the blind man doesn't have the ability to see colors. You might say, but 1 second, someone can explain it to him. You can't. He can't see colors. You can use all different examples and metaphors, but it's not the real thing. So on the bottom of page, Pei 3 lines from the bottom, and we'll start from here. And what we're actually going to do is really, by saying that we can't understand it, we're going to explain how in a way we could understand it. That's going to be the cool thing about this chapter. The end of this chapter is that we're sort of going to say, so it's something we could relate to by explaining how we think, and let's see if we can get there today. Bottom of the page, because a person pictures in his intellect. A person pictures in your mind. Someone talks to you about an angel. Someone talks about the nature of a certain animal, a parakeet. You imagine that concept, how we picture it. We say angels have wings. We picture wings like we have wings. Their wings don't work the same way. They don't have shapes of physical nature. So we always project. If someone says make a picture of an angel, make a picture of something with wings. I have news for you. They don't have wings, but they have wings, but they're not wings like we have. It's like it's a concept. A person imagines and pictures in his brain and his intellect any concept you want to understand. How you have it in yourself. You picture it, and I since I read this last week and the last couple of days, I'm thinking about every time someone says a story, oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. It happened to me last week. Always, whatever you have, I know what you're talking about because it happened to me. Or I can always compare it and bring it down to, and it's even more fascinating is, the Rebbe spoke about this once, how everyone interprets it into their world. For example, someone who's a sports fan, everything you tell them, yeah, in sports you have such a concept. They always right away project, that's the world they live in. So we always project and picture a concept based on our personal experience. Oh, I know how that feels. Yeah, what's happened to me? Even if we don't get that far, we're seeing it from our perspective. That's why we have such a hard time when someone went through the Holocaust and talks about it. We're numb. Sometimes kids go there and don't have feelings. Sometimes they get overwhelmed. Why are they numb without feelings? They can't relate to it. It's a cruelty. It's a world they can't even picture. Thank God. They don't know how to relate to it. It's just, there's no way they can say, oh, I know it. No, I don't know what it's like. I can't understand it. So when you get there, there's no way to picture it. So it's just numb. It's out of my ability. For example, you want to picture in your mind the concept of ratzain, desire, will, or the concept of intellect, chachma. And we're being today in today's chapter very particular about the chachma bin das, not like the general chachma bin das, but what is chachma? Chachma, as you remember, is the initial flash of information. It's the first seed of creating a child. It's a flash of everything and nothing at the same time. Just to go back, if you remember from a few years ago when we discussed chachma bin das, we explained chachma and bina would be best understood as a metaphor of somebody walking at night in the forest and he's lost. And he comes into a cabin. He finds an abandoned or empty cabin, and it's pitch black, not a bit of light. And suddenly, the flash of thunder and lightning, and for a second, the whole room was lit up. Now he has to quickly think, okay, I saw to the right was a staircase. In front of me, there was a window. There was a couch here. What are you doing? Everything which came to me in a flash, I'm trying to now develop. And if you wait, you lose it. Because that flash, in our own intellect, that's how our first stage is. Our first stage is Chachma is a flash, is a dot, is a drop, is a ping of something. Now, Bina is unpacking that, opening it up, unpacking it, like the mother that takes a child and develops it. What the little flash was, now we can build arms, legs, sinews, heart, lungs, because that's all unpacking what's there. If you lose it, it's gone. There's a small window, yes.
Or sometimes when you are studying something and you don't get it, and then suddenly oh, now I understand.
Right. Let me take that a step further. I mean, you say, now I understand. Someone asks you, what? I said, no. I need to develop. What do you mean? Do you understand or not? I do, but don't talk to me right now because I'll lose it. I got a small flash of it. Let me develop this thought and I'll come back to you. Because that's exactly Chachma, and we'll see, we're going to come back to Chachma soon, but now that you mentioned this part, I'll tell you. Chachma, what's important to know about it is receiving. I am receiving information. From where? Sometimes a teacher sharing brilliant ideas, teaching a subject which is fascinating. Sometimes you're listening to a lecture online, reading a book, and sometimes it comes from deep within your soul. When you have a flash of Chachma, when Chachma pops into your head, you're actually getting a fax, a message, a shockwave from your subconscious to your conscious. Your subconscious has a world going on that we can't even begin to talk about it, which means our minds can't grasp the world of our subconscious. I'll just give you an example. The amount of calculations that your subconscious self is making right now for your blood pressure, for your body temperature, for your eye movements, for your breathing, it is a world a supercomputer couldn't handle this. There's millions and billions of calculations going on. If we try and understand what our subconscious is doing, it's out of our ability. Who is running that department that keeps the electrical pulse in my heart and the coordination of the different sides of my heart to pump the blood, move it in, the oxygen, make sure it's getting inserted? Who's in charge of saying, hey, when you inhale, push that oxygen into the blood? Now, blood, remember which one's going in, which one's going out. There's a world, and this is just one dot of millions of activities. The subconscious world, our feelings and reactions, how we get prickly when certain people walk into the room, or how we respond to certain situations, or how we have a sense of something, or things pop into our head. Where does that come from? It's a world out of our ability. And we're going to see towards the end of this discussion that we can relate to it. There's a world going on that we can't understand. We can all understand that from our own bodies. That's what we're going to get to soon. There's a world of our subconscious that we cannot understand. We just believe that it functions. We cannot picture how it works. We don't know how it's going on, how so many calculations are happening at the same time. I'm trying to do two things at once. Someone tells me, okay, give the kids a bath and make supper and then try and help them with the homework. Forget about it. Your subconscious is doing that plus 10,000 more things at once because it's a different level of function, but we can't relate to it, so we don't use it as an example, except right now. But back to our story here. So in the Chachma, the wisdom, which means not wisdom in the regular sense, but that flash of what we call conception, Oy Bina, which is comprehension or development of thought, Oy Das is key to today's discussion. Das is that which makes anything we have in our Chachma and Bina relevant. You might know something, you might be aware of something, but if it's not personal, it doesn't affect you. The famous story the Rebbe said a number of times in Farbrengens is the story about the guy who was illiterate, and he gets a letter from his family that his father died, unfortunately, but he can't read, so he goes to the scholar in town to read a letter to him, and he's there, Yankel, sorry to inform you, your father died, and he falls on the floor and faints. His father died, he had no idea he was sick. Meanwhile, the guy who was intelligent, a brilliant guy, reads a letter, he's emotionless. Who understands English better, understands the quality of life, the simpleton or this wise scholar? But the guy scholar, it's impersonal, it's not connected to him, it means nothing to him. I mean, comparatively. The other guy, it's Das. Das means it touches me. The information I have is not just data, it touches me. And that's the third very important component that affects our existence. And we're going to talk about Das today quite a bit. Or we project what we understand about chesed, kindness, rachamim, mercy. Rachamim is the idea of empathy, able to feel what you're feeling. And all these cases and all these similar things, when you hear these words, kindness, mercy, all these words, you immediately project it how, oh yeah, I know happiness, I know kindness, because I've been kind, someone has been kind to me. Meaning every experience, every word we hear, we're translating it how we experienced it, which means, getting it back to our case, as we'll see, we can't understand how God works and functions because we don't have the abilities to tap into his level, as we'll get to. But in truth, Hashem is uplifted, he's higher, and he's Kadesh. The word Kadesh here is very interesting. Kadesh, as you mentioned, means separate. If you ever notice that every time we talk about something godly, the word Kadesh comes into the picture. The Beis Hamikdash, Davar Shebekdusha, things that are holy, Tashmishe Kedusha, things that are used for mitzvahs. Think of any word that you have in holiness. Kedusha, what does it mean? It's above my pay grade. Kedusha means it's out of my ability to really understand it. What does it mean that something is holy? That something is imbued with sanctity? I just say, okay, it's holy, it's separate. It's out of my, it's not a cop-out, but it's a way to say it's something out of my realm. We can't, the definition of spirituality, is something which is not limited to 6 dimensions. Doesn't have a top, bottom, right, left, front, or back. Doesn't have something, we can't picture that. We don't, the closest we can get is the Wi-Fi, is gravity. But we have a trouble relating to things that don't have a shape. Hashem gifted us in the last 100 years with the knowledge of radio, and I don't know how many years back is radio, 18 somethings, the ability to know about things that are invisible and not touching. So we have the ability to relate to a soul. I guess it's like Wi-Fi, but it's different than Wi-Fi. But we have very limited, so we just say it's Kaddish, it's holy. Hashem is separate and uplifted, meaning detached from us in an understanding way. Millions of levels ad enkei tachlis madriges until infinity. My kids asked me the other day, Zalman wants to know, what's the highest number? So I tell him, well, it goes to 1 million, 1 billion, 1 trillion. He goes, is that the highest number? I said, it goes higher, but I don't know how to get there. He said, what's the last number? So I tell him, it's a Googleplex. He goes, that's it. And that's not a Google Plus, right? It's a Googleplex. That's the last number, We don't know. There's no end. We go into the figure 8. How many times could you go around till you finish it? So yeah, good luck. So what does it mean? That's how many times God's greater than us. You're going to try and understand it. You're going to try and grasp, this concept. Sorry. And therefore Hashem is so much higher than any description we can give. We spoke last week not to give descriptions in davening to Hashem, other than what the sages shows, because anything you're going to say is automatically about how I see it, my projection, my understanding. And it's big, like we said, the Grand Canyon, that's big. It's Hashem, how big he is? Bigger than the Grand Canyon. He's giant, bigger than the universe. Wow, that's really big for Hashem. It's silly, but that's how we project it. We can't picture things that are bigger than that.
Because we need to project to understand. That's the problem.
Right. We only understand through projection. We only understand based on experience. And now we're going to go into a beautiful analysis starting here. We're going to go now into understand the function of ourselves, how we function. And we'll take both intellectual and emotionally, how we function. And this goes straight to the end of the chapter, and I'm going to try and finish it all in the next 20 minutes. Because the first step in our conscious selves, let's go into the world of our consciousness. Subconscious, it's a world we can't really relate to because it functions on a level, like I said, our minds can't grasp what's going on in the subconscious, and we can't control it. Unless you're at tzaddik, you can't control your subconscious. Famous example, you can't control what pops into your head because you're not the guy popping in. It's your subconscious, meaning you can't control who knocks on your door. You can control if you let them in. So you can't control what pops into your head. The weirdest thoughts, you can only control if you open the door and let them in. Hey, let me think about this for a while. That's a weird thought. You can control what you let into your head and what you think about, but you can't control what you think of. That's your subconscious. So the first stage of your own functioning self is Chachma. Chachma is the highest point of intellect, and that's the received flash. That's where you start getting stuff. Suddenly, boom, pops into your head a solution, an idea, a concept. That is Chachma. The first, or you conceive an idea. It's the earliest stages of conscious self. Not earliest, the first. Interesting, by the way, according to the translation, we have various people who translate the Chumash. One of the most famous was Onkelos. He translated to Aramaic. You also have Targum Yonis Ben Azil. You have what's called also Targum Yerushalmi. The other translations translate the word Bereshis bara Elokim. In the beginning, God created. They translate Bereshis to Bechachmasa, with Chachma. The beginning is Chachma. That's why there's this famous thing called Reshis Chachma.
According to
The Targum Yonis Ben Azil.
Targum.
Yeah,
Okay.
he says the Chachmas. Bereshis means Chachmasa. What does that mean? The first stage is Chachma. That's where it begins. This is the first starting point. Okay. All life that goes on in our, right here, the little nugget that we have going on in our feelings, our emotions, it starts in Chachma. That is the first point of life, first point of activity. And he's going to go through the 5 stages. The 5 stages are going to be Seichel, which we're going to break into 3. Then you have Midas, that's the emotions. You have the cognitive and the emotionals. And then you have the 3 stages of garments, Machshava, Dibra, Maisa. This is how we function 100%. If you're an unhealthy person, your Midas come before your Machshava. And this is, we spoke about that in chapter, I believe, 6. I think in chapter 6 or chapter 5 or 6, we spoke about that concept that by the animal soul, first comes emotions, then comes seichel. First I feel something, then I justify it. You know why I don't like you? I'll tell you why. Because of, I'll never forget, one of my teachers, actually my uncle, he was a teacher in our class, and he tells a kid, get out of class. He says, why? He says, get out of class. He goes, why? He says, because you didn't get out the first time. I'm like, whoa, okay, I can't figure that one out. But I think he forgot why he kicked the cat out of class. He was somewhat disturbing, but it was like funny. You have to have first come seichel. And then your seichel, rationally, you decide this person is dangerous. This food is unhealthy. This person I love. This person I want to be next to. All the emotions come from seichel. So you say like this. The first thing is, let's see this inside. From chachma flows and travels bina, which is comprehension, and then das, which is application, how you live and apply it to yourself. And from there, a healthy person flows all the emotions. Why do I dislike this person? Why do I dislike this thing? Why am I afraid of that? Because of my intellectual knowledge that I know about it. Which goes on in your thinking soul. For an example, love, chesed, kindness, rachmim, mercy, and now we're going to go back and give a fascinating example which applies to a child, but this could also apply to an immature adult, or as you'll see sometimes to brilliant people. What is that? It's people who haven't developed properly. He's like this: a child that's lacking das. Now he doesn't say chachma. He says a child doesn't have das. Das means the ability to apply what you know, what you think, to your actions. Sometimes you meet, I don't know if I meet in person, but I watch videos on YouTube about them, brilliant kids that could do mathematics at 4 or 5 years old, or child prodigies that can play an instrument like amazing pianists. They're the same little babies that cry for the silliest things. You say, but I thought you're a genius. He's genius, but he doesn't know how to apply that into his day-to-day life. You have brilliant people that are clueless in dealing with people. You have guys that are brilliant and can't function. Their noses run. They don't know about it. You know, they talk to you and they're scratching their ears. They're clueless. But I thought you're brilliant. Brilliant doesn't mean that you connect into the functioning world as a functioning brilliant. It means that you have a genius. Das means the ability that all that's up here to apply it to how you function. So a child lacks das. Das is the last thing that a child develops, which is why we see in the children something phenomenal. But he's going to say here, we'll see him, pardon me, it's my son calling from Israel. I'll tell him, we'll catch him later. Okay, part of what he's going to say now might seem to be unfair to the description of a child, but if you think about it, it's on the money sharp. Let's see it inside, and then we'll talk about this. Okay. He says, he's always angry. It doesn't mean that he's always angry. It means he can always get angry in a second. The happiest kid, and I've seen this with my delicious children all the time. You buy them the most delicious, they want a certain sugar cereal, Fruity Pebbles, and everything's good, but you gave them the wrong spoon. The world falls apart. Or you open the bag yourself, they wanted to open the bag, or they wanted to pour the milk. Whatever the case might be. You were so happy. Why are you getting miserable and throwing a tantrum? Because to the child, any second the thing didn't go exactly, you have 99 things perfect, and then you put it down on the wrong placemat, or someone else poured the milk, or you poured it too fast, or too slow, or too high, or too low, too little. That's it. The whole thing fell apart. Why? Because he doesn't have the ability to apply logic to function. And that's why a child, the next word sounds very mean, but it says achzari. Children can be cruel. Think about how often your child who's 2 years old considers you have a migraine headache, and he wants to bother you to go to a store, or he wants to buy something, or you're sleeping and he wakes you up, you just fall asleep on the couch, and he wakes you up screaming. Why? Because he can't get to the next level on a game, or he just had to turn on the computer. The children don't consider others. It's not because they don't love others. They don't know how to apply the responsibility or the feeling of someone else before themselves. So a child's lacking the ability to see outside his box. The world is all for my function. In other words, he doesn't have das. He doesn't connect. He sees, and therefore children could be cruel. You say, you want to share? No. I don't want, I've seen my little child sometimes in front of the kid, can I have a play date with Zalman? I don't want him to come today. Don't say it in front of her, but I don't want him to come today. I want to do this with the mushkis here, whatever. So why do they do that? Because they don't get how it feels to somebody else. They don't have das. Everything is in here. They don't understand other. It's all about self. So the child lives in that world. Because of that, everything that's going to bother him could be silliest things. Like I said, the milk you poured instead of him, or whatever the case is, he can't or she cannot handle the smallest changes or things didn't go the way they want. And you have it with adults too. Adults that are childish and mature get upset. You see it, the pettiness that a person can be. They're either acting childish or they're in the childish mode. And the smallest things will upset them. Either because their picture of what matters in life is small, the color of the lollipop is the most important thing to a child. That's the chseichel, or the das. They don't know how to handle when it didn't go their way. So they don't. So the candy broke in half before you ate it. You're going to eat it anyway. The world fell apart. Okay. The gamma he also loves things it doesn't pay to love. It's silly to care about the balloon. He doesn't have the ability to love things that are worth to love. Love, something important. Love $100 bill at least more than the candy. It doesn't. What happens here? We're going to go through the process now. So you have like this. The first step you have is the seichel. The seichel is the intellect, and the seichel will divide now into three composite, three things: chachma, bina, das. But that world of seichel now translates and falls down from that world of seichel. It trickles down to the world called emotions, and then the child has emotions. Now those emotions trickle down into a world called machshava, thought. Now a lot of times people confuse machshava, thought, and seichel, intellect. There's no necessary connection. Usually your thought is the tools you use to think about intellectual stuff. But to be honest, 99% of our thoughts come from our default zone. You see, our impulse level, our natural function as human beings, because of our animal soul, is emotional, not intellectual. Which means, if you were to stop yourself 99% of the day and ask yourself, what was I just thinking? Now, first of all, your mind's always thinking. Your mind thinks 24/7. Your mind doesn't stop, or as long as you're conscious, I should say. So it should be, as long as you're awake, your mind's thinking. It doesn't stop for a second. Some people don't stop talking, but that's not as common. But thinking is constant thinking. Now, if you would stop and ask yourself, most of what you think is emotional. What does that mean? Either something that you like, you're thinking about it, something you don't like, something because you want to do and accomplish, something you don't want to do and accomplish, meaning, or you think about things that make you feel good. Some people think about sports. Some people think about they have fantasies about food. They think about, some people have more intellectual things. They like thinking about music or math. But all your thoughts are things about you like. Hardly ever do you think on an impulse level and on intellectual ideas. You might stop and say, you know what, I got to think about something important now, intellectual. That's fine. You're going to learn a sikha, you're going to study some Talmud. But in general, impulse thinking, because it's midos, it comes from yourself, is always going to be naturally on things that are emotionally related. That means 99% of the time, stop what you're thinking. I'm thinking about something I like or don't like. Someone hurt me, didn't hurt me. Someone I'm upset about, my kids or my feelings, or my grandchild, whatever it is, it's always things that you feel, because that's how we function.
Even if you want to go for Torah or say or see how that you like.
Yeah. Now once you get into it, you can get into the world of intellectual. But the natural impulse of thinking, I'm talking about impulse, what pops into your head without effort. Effort you could change to think about intellectual stuff. Now, which means just because you're thinking doesn't mean it's intellectual. You could be, but I think doesn't make sense. A lot of people have views on life, which are, whether it's the environment, whether it's health, whatever it is, that are maybe not so logical. And the proof is, me and you can have opposite opinions, or probably one of us are right, one of us are wrong. So the one who was wrong is thinking in their thoughts, things that aren't intellectually accurate. Or sometimes can both be right. And that's not as common, but that could both be right. But the bottom line is, your thought doesn't mean it's intellectual. So you have intellect, you have emotion, and from there it trickles down into thought. And from thought, it trickles down into speech, and from speech, it trickles down into action. And this process is very critical because thought is the way you express yourself to yourself. When you want to think about something, forget about just impulsive thinking, but you're thinking about something. You're usually thinking about expressing your feelings to yourself. It's the first level of expression, is expressing to myself, how do I feel about this? You don't have to ask yourself. I'm thinking about a person, I'm thinking about a food, I'm thinking about a job, I'm thinking about what I want to say, I'm expressing to myself. Speech is expression to other human beings. I'm conversing with you, I'm sharing my thoughts to you. Even though a person could converse with an animal or pet, but that's interesting. The old joke about this guy, he says, our neighbor, he turns to his cat. Our neighbor talks to him as a bird. He's a weirdo. You're talking to your cat. Basically, people talk to their pets. That's okay. That's their department. I'm not going to be judged. We're not going to judge. But chances are the dog is not really paying much attention to your thoughts. He's probably just thinking, okay, so I got to get myself a piece of a cookie later. That's it. But the lowest step of function is action. Action means that I'm actually interacting with another dimension. Not human beings necessarily, but things. I'm building, I'm digging, I'm creating, I'm baking, I'm interacting with the physical world. These are levels of how the structure. And now what we're going to say here, and I'm going to read through it quickly now, our function world of understanding and projection and picture goes from chachma to action. That's our universe that we live in. We live in a universe of 5 stages: intellect, emotion, thought, speech, action. We can't picture things lower than that, and we can't picture things bigger than that. We picture an angel, we somehow try and relate how an angel fits into our picture. We picture a mosquito. Do mosquitoes have feelings? We try and picture they have bones like us. What's the difference? We're trying to figure out how they match to our world. Everything is projecting and trying to measure how that fits into our reality. We can't go below Maisa and above Chachma. That's the box we live in, and that's what we're going to explain here. This is why we can't understand God, because God deals with a different level of Chachma. And this answers, by the way, and I'm going to say this one side now, a massive question, a question that's asked over and over. How can we have free choice? If God knows what we're going to do tomorrow, how's that free choice? For example, am I going to go tomorrow? God says, let's see what he's going to choose. You know already, it's decided. I can't even change the future because you know the future. And if I'm going to change it, I knew that I was going to change it. Whatever, I can't untrick you. You know what? I'm going to double change it. Whatever I'm going to do, you know already. The answer is because we're projecting seichel like our seichel. God's seichel works differently. I was reading from Steinsaltz this morning. He says, if you look at maps, most maps make pictures of low ground in green and high ground in brown.
Yes.
Now, we don't even think about why, but it's usually because grass grows in lower areas and the high areas leave less grass. He says, but does it really mean that if it's over there, there's grass there or it's green? No. He says, so if we think, and we show a kid a map and we think all the high places are going to be green, you're not understanding how a map works. You're projecting. There's a certain way we project things. We think that God's intellect works like ours. It doesn't. And therefore, his knowledge of the future doesn't affect our actions. So it's not that we can explain why it doesn't. It just doesn't match our seichel, our intellect. The only thing we have in common with the map and the place that is brown, it's much more complex than that. We don't have a way to project our world of logic to Hashem. And therefore, that's above Chachma, of our Chachma. And therefore, Hashem's knowledge of the future doesn't affect our free choice. That's just the concept. Okay, now let's see if we can finish this inside. Oi. So let me go back 2 lines. And from the midas flows down the words and the letters of machshava. Again, the 2 emotions. Either you're thinking about something you love, or you think, or you think how to apply it. I want to go and bake something for the shul. I want to go and help out a family. I want to make a supper for I want to do something for the veterans. That's all. Either thinking about them or thinking what to do. So we have 2 tracks constantly. One is a track of intellectual thinking, or I should say emotional thinking, about how I feel about this. I feel so sad for them. I feel so happy for them. They make me so happy. They make me so sad. Or how can I help them out? Or how can I get this guy back? This jerk, he stole my parking place. I'm going to park. Whatever you want to think about is always in one of those two worlds. And by the way, and the more you think about it, the angrier you can get, or the happier you can get. Same with speaking. The more you speak about it, the more you get worked up and start, raising your voice or start crying emotionally if you talk about something that hurts. The Shaar middays, and same thing with all other emotions, whether they're not necessarily kindness and love, but you won't mention them here. And every single machshava has its fire, its letters that exist within it. From these letters of thought, they come down to the world of speech. Like I said, you have this process: intellect, emotion, thought. Now we're going down to speech. That's the life of your speech. Whatever you're going to speak is coming from your thoughts. As a matter of fact, we have something called muscle memory, where you could do certain things out of habit. You also can have that you say something enough times, or you think enough times, it pops out. Things you think about sometimes. Oops, I didn't mean to say that. Or you bench so many times without trying to, by heart, because these things remain as like a memory that keeps repeating itself. And then the next level, this brings you down into action. It brings down to the world of action. If you get like a king who commands someone, this is a king or anyone with power. I have a thought I want. I go, you get me a cup of coffee. You go clean up your room. Go make your bed. Go to school. Do your homework. But also, a person sometimes within themselves could jump. Now, to understand, when you sometimes in your own world don't speak, unless you're one of those people that talk to yourself a lot, which is pretty common these days. If you don't talk to yourself, you can go straight from thought to action. But it doesn't mean that you sort of took a roundabout route. It means you jumped through. It's like going down a staircase 2 steps at a time. You just didn't process that properly. But you could jump straight from thought in your own world to action. It's just not properly. Usually the process would be to speak it out, to talk about it. You think of something, you think about it, you talk about it, and then you do it. But you could, in your own world, jump straight to action. He says it here. Or, for example, he says, and now he's going back to the reverse. He's explaining now how each one of these levels are nothing compared to the previous level, which means the world and energy and life of action is so much smaller than the world and the level of life of speech. And speech compared to thought, and thought compared to the world of emotion, and emotion to intellect. So he's going to work now the next 3 lines backwards up the hill. The difference between action and speech is like a difference between a body and a soul. Why does he use that expression? Like action and speech is a body and a soul. So a few minutes ago I mentioned that the world of thought is expressing to yourself. The world of speech is expressing to other humans. But the world of action is actually dealing with the physical world. And it jumps from the world of speech, which is the human beings are called medaber, to animals, to plant life, and to inanimate. You could do action. Suddenly in speech, you could only have speech with a human being. But the action could go down to animals, down to plant life, and down to inanimate. That means it's a complete change in our level of interaction. If all three things, thought, speech, and action, are interfaces, the interface of action is the most dramatic, because you could interact and interface with physical stuff. You could eat cookies, you could climb a mountain, you interact in a tremendous way with physical action with the world in a way which is like the leap from a body to a soul. Unlike speech and thought, which are limited to humans, and within humans themselves, more of an intellectual or on the level of speech, because humans can connect also on level of action. Same thing if you go back now, the letters that are found in speech compared to how they are up to the channel, up to the level of thought. And the same thing, you can climb up the ladder, can compare the level of your thoughts going up to the level of the midas where it comes from, and that which gives life and vitality to your thoughts. and comparing your emotions that are something that flow down from the world of seichel, your cognitive powers, which is chachma bin das. Sheklaluson hu seichel, which those three things together are your cognitive abilities, your seichel. Shemenu nimshos midazu, and that's where your feelings came from. Where does your feelings come from? Your seichel. If you're healthy. Now, the kol zeh, all of this is benefesh adam. And this is found within the soul of a person, of a nefesh kol habaruyim, sheba kol el ma'aseh v'tachtonim, sheba kulam ha'chachma, reiches v'makar ha'chayis. And all of this is the reality of the world that applies both to humans and all the higher creations, angels, spirits, souls, that they also function from chachma to malchus. They also function in this box. So he says, we, human beings, we created beings, can only function and only project from our level of chachma to action. From seichel to action. Now, next paragraph is going to start off, but Hashem, where we end, that's where he didn't even begin yet. And now meaning we're trying to explain how the whole discussion here is understanding the oneness of Hashem, the absolute lack of having composites. So we started off saying the Rambam says that we can't understand it. So he's saying the truth is we could understand, because we could understand that we only comprehend that which was in our wavelength, but that which is above it, so we understand now with intellect that there's a world above us. Meaning the more we understand about ourselves, the more we understand how limited we are, and there's another world above us. And in our case, we're talking about our subconscious world. And in the case of Hashem and creation, means another world of existence that's beyond our ability to comprehend. So that's the end of chapter 8. But again, we're going to continue this journey to understand how Hashem's essence, even though it's made up, or seems to be made up, of Chachma, Bina, Das, etc., Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, etc., is not, God forbid, a composite. It's an absolute oneness, and we'll do that next couple chapters.